Hi guys, today's video is going to be something super special. We are going to be talking about the new NATASHA DENONA Retro Glam palette, not to be confused with NATASHA DENONA Retro palette, as well as NATASHA DENONA Glam palette. There are now 3 palettes with some sort of combination of all of these names, which is going to be a little bit confusing, but this is the latest one. This is the Retro Glam palette. Of course, we have to talk about the outer packaging, which is super beautiful. This is a beautiful pale pink color. You can see it has this really cool greeny sage design through it. It's really, really beautiful. Definitely feels like the retro vibe that we were all hoping for, so I'm really excited to see that. This is a midi palette as well. There are 15 shades in it. This palette is made in Italy. It has a 24-month shelf life, and we do have a number of beautiful textures and formulas in this palette. So here's how it looks opened up. You can see one of the shades almost matches my top very, very closely actually, which is super fun. This is exactly the kind of vision that I think a lot of us were expecting from the retro, like the mini retro, when she was going to get expanded. So this is the mini retro palette. This is the first palette that came out with the retro name, and then she came out with retro, which was a very Valentine's-y kind of palette. It's definitely extremely beautiful, but it's nowhere near what we pictured the retro expansion to look like. So this to me is a beautiful, beautiful palette. I actually like this one over her Love palette, actually. This one is definitely the Valentine's vibes. This one is called Retro, so not to be confused, right? The other palette is called Glam. So this one, again, has no look comparison to this one either. This is the Glam palette. And you can see here, there's beautiful cool tones, some neutrals in there, and it's a beautiful, glamorous palette that is actually one of her best sellers, if not probably the best-selling palette she has. It's really, really beautiful, perfect for everyday looks to zhuzh up from work-friendly all the way to a night out. So this is a lovely one, but once again, not close in color story to this one. I did get this palette from a friend. So one of my friends on Instagram, her name is Casey, and she sourced the palette for me. My friend actually found it at her local Sephora, and what happened, I think, was there was some kind of confusion because she has a retro palette and she has a glam palette. When her store got the retro glam, I think they thought that was what it was supposed to be. Like, I think they thought this was supposed to be retro. So that was the confusion. This is actually going to be released on November 11th. So this is a genuine palette. It was just early released in some Sephora stores. Thank you to Casey, by the way, for sourcing it for me. She has an Instagram page. I loved seeing her swatches and everything. She also sent me this cute little note. It's so adorable with the palette. Oh, it's adorable. It says, "Jenna, I'm so happy to help out a new friend. I can't wait to see your review. Thank you for your kindness. Have a great holiday season. As to you, my friend." And I do hope that you will check out her Instagram page as well. Let's get into the formulas. There are quite a few in this palette, and with all the 15 shades, we're gonna go row by row, and I'll show you guys what each formulation is. So starting from the top row on the left, the first shade is called Flare. Flare is a sparkling metallic. We also have Jazzy, which is the next shade. It is a metallic. We have Oscar, which is a metallic. We have Evergreen, which is a cream to powder. And we have Marlin, which is a metallic. The next shade is Maxi. It is a metallic. We also have Sage, which is a creamy matte. We have Holly, which is a creamy matte. Fringe is a creamy matte. And Faye is also a creamy matte. The last row has Flutter, which is probably one of my favorite shades. It is a chroma crystal. We have Lucy, which is a creamy matte. We have Palladian, which is a metallic. Belle is a creamy matte, and Oz is a metallic. So you can see there's actually quite a few metallics in this palette. The metallic finish is the dominant finish in this palette. You can see there are 7 out of the 15 shades, so almost half are the metallics. When I swatch this palette, which you will see next, it is really beautifully performing. There isn't one dud shade that is swatched in this palette yet. So the swatches, I've always cautioned my viewers, it's only a piece of the puzzle. Really, it is how it applies on the eyes, of course, to see truly how shades work. But I do find that some swatches give me a little bit of an idea as to how best to apply certain shades. So this one is very consistent from the other NATASHA palettes I have, and I think I must have nearly her entire collection at this point, so I have tested quite a few now. When it comes to repeat shades, there are none in this palette, but interesting to know, there is a shade in the Mini Glam palette called Faye, and it's a totally different finish and color compared to this Faye in this palette, so just beware of that. You might think that it's actually a duplicate shade, but it's not by any means. It is a totally different shade, but with the same name, so kind of confusing. But, I mean, we have Retro Glam in my hands here, which is two palettes names combined, like Retro and Glam, and the Sephora staff are all like, what is this? So I think there's a bit of confusion anyway, but I'm not mad at it. I do really love this palette so far with the swatches, and basically the fact that this vision for the extension of Mini Retro has been realized. I really, really love Mini Retro. This is definitely my top 3 in her minis, and this has come out a while ago now, and I just really love this palette for a beautiful, sparkly retro vibe. This brings me really quickly to my friend Mel, who actually put together her dream retro combination, and she was using Sydney Gray shades to create it. And you guys, I was so shocked at how similar this looked to the palette that Natasha Denona created. I couldn't believe how similar they were. And Sydney Grace actually does have the bundle available. It is on their website, so if you are interested, you can purchase that. But I'm going to show you guys my friend Casey's swatch comparisons to Mel, because she actually did a very beautiful job on her Instagram. So I'm going to show you guys this graphic here. This is the difference. Like, Mel's has a little bit more of that greeny pull when it comes to the sagey shades, whereas the Natasha one is kind of on the bluer side, but pretty dang close. Like, I could not believe how similar, and it just made me miss her so much, because this is totally a palette she would have wanted to see. And yeah, it just makes me feel super sad, but I do know she's smiling at all of us being like, see, she did do it. So just kind of shows her creativity and talent with putting palettes together. She's on par with Natasha Denona herself, who is a legend. So I feel like Mel had the exact same creativity, and it shows in her retro kind of concept versus the one that Natasha actually made. Now for my look today, I created something, in my opinion, a little bit more bold when it comes to color, but still something that actually works together very well. So going all over the lid, I started with the shade Lucy, which is one of her mattes, and it built really beautifully. Now, just like her other creamy mattes in some of her other palettes, we do have some kick up in the pan, so just be careful. You're going to see some kick up as you place your brush in. That is to be expected though. It's something I've seen in other palettes as well. This one coated the lid beautifully, about 2 layers to get full opacity, and this one does do a great job of blending out for quite a ways on your lid there, and it just looks super beautiful. It's like this perfect foundation shade. So these two shades, when you actually look at them in pan, you may think they look redundant or that they almost look too close, but this is them swatched. They're pretty different. So Lucy is the one on the left and Faye on the right. One has quite a bit more depth and is darker than the other. So even though you see them in the pan very similarly, like that shade almost looks like it's exactly the same or very similar, they're not when swatched. So just keep that in mind. The pinks have a lot more distinction here, and same with the sage colors. There's a few pairs like this in the palette. The other one is here, which is Jazzy and Maxi. You can see those two almost look like, are they going to be the same as well? These purples are a little bit closer, and in my opinion, perhaps one of them could have been switched out for something else. So I would say this is the closest pair in this palette, but there's a lot of them that look almost pretty close, right? And the Faye and the Lucy shades do look different when swatched. And although the Maxi and the Jazz shade I just showed you, or Jazzy, those two are different, but I think because of how similar they swatch, it would be nice to see maybe something else in place of that. Maybe like a deep olive matte or something to kind of add a little bit of something different. But that's really me nitpicking. I do think they both hold a place, but kind of like, if I had my ideal arrangement, that's one of them would be yanked and I would put a deep olive matte instead. The next shade I went all over the lid with is this next matte called Sage. This one as well, layered beautifully, kick up in the pan, be careful with that, but it does seem to really do a great job of blending out and layering just like the rest of the mattes. I also used this shade in the lower lid today to just kind of bring this look together. Now, my opinion of a sage color is kind of like this. I'm going to show you guys on my phone. This to me is like sage, okay? it's a little bit more of a green gray versus this color is more of a blue-green. So to me, it's like not quite the total, like true definition of a sage color, but don't let that fool you. It's still a really beautiful shade. But I just kind of found it interesting how the shade name is not quite the traditional like color of sage. It is much more blue in this palette than what I would think sage is, but it's just like a fun fact. It's not like it's a deal breaker or anything. Next, I went in with Marlin, which is a metallic. This one is beautiful. It did seem to add just that extra little sparkle. So it's very similar in color to Sage. It just has a little bit more of a silvery sparkle quality. So it's adding a little bit of that shimmer that I really, really like. And I wanted to start this look off. I didn't want this look to end off matte. I wanted the Lucy and the Sage shades to build this look, and then have the beautiful Marlin shade to start off that shimmer. So this one did a great job when I placed it with my fingertip. I traditionally do this with a NATASHA DENONA metallic, just because I do find this is the best way to control fallout as well as opacity on the lid. So this one is the shade I'm talking about here. This performed well as well, but I did have some fallout on the face despite using my fingertip. It was minimal, but something to think about for sure and to note. We have Evergreen and Maxi that I actually put my brush in together. So I actually started putting some in the Evergreen shade, same brush went in with Maxi and put both of them in the outer corner of the look here. The Evergreen shade did not have enough depth to it to give me as much shadowing as I wanted on this look. I really needed to add Maxi in there to give it a little bit more depth. You can see here it's still on the lighter opacity side of things, so it was not going to give me as much depth as if I added Maxi. So those two together are making the depth in the outer corner of my lid today. Lastly, I went in with Flutter. Flutter is a beautiful shade. It's the Chroma Crystal in here, which is right here. This one I did add just in the middle as a spotlight on the lid. You guys know I'm kind of like a creature of habit when it comes to building eye looks. I have a very particular style that I like to stick with, and it's having shimmer in the middle is just like that perfect little finishing touch. I rarely go out of this box, but this is how I like to create my looks. But you know what this reminds me of? Like NATASHA DENONA's Pat McGrath formulation, if that makes sense. NATASHA DENONA's version of that. This one has very similar, it's not quite as gel-like as the Pat formula, but it's like her Blitz Astrals are, where they have quite a beautiful, like, soft, clear glaze of shimmer that just looks like a veil. This reminds me of Pat's Blitz Astrals with a little bit more creaminess to it versus gel. So I really actually love this shade. Fallout was actually minimal. I didn't see too much on the lid. I did apply this with a fingertip as well, but this is a beautiful shade too. I really enjoyed it. So that was the finishing touch to this look, and we have the look today. Now going into all of the palettes for comparison today. So there isn't any with Glam or Retro. These are distinct enough that if you have both of these palettes already, you can get Retro Glow and have zero regrets, because these two are their own league of their own. We don't have duplicates. We don't have even similarities, in my opinion. This is collections that are on their own, despite the name being so close. This doesn't fall in the same thread. It really is its own thread. The two palettes I was kind of like, do we have some similarities? Pastel and Circo Loco. Both of these I wanted to see for certain. So Circo Loco is a bigger size palette, just so you guys know. And this one is a much more like bright colored, bold color. There's lots of depth, the dark navies and blues in this one. So those are not the shades I'm talking about. I'm talking about this purple up here. I wondered how close it was. And same with Snow Cone, and then Fun to Mime, I think is how you say it, Fun to Mime, and even this Cotton Candy shade. When you see them side by side, you will see what I mean. We do have the Retro Glam shades on the left of each pair, and we have Circo Loco shades on the right of each pair. You can see that they are all quite distinct. I think the pinks are probably the closest, but even Cotton Candy has more of a purple element versus Holly in Retro Glam. So I would say the pink pair is the only two, and even then it is grasping at straws because they are still quite different. So that's what I like to see, especially if you are a NATASHA DENONA collector and you're wanting quite a few palettes, you enjoy them, you don't want to buy products that have the exact same thing repeated. And that was kind of what caught my eye, was some of those shades in Circo Loco. Are they similar? No, they're not. The next one I thought I'd compare it to is Pastel, but you can see Pastel is a lot brighter. A lot brighter. So we don't have any dupes or similarities between these palettes either. This is a beautiful, like, pastel palette for sure. It's like the name is perfect in this one. The Retro Glam palette has more of, it's not grungy per se. Grungy is not quite the word, but it sort of has a little bit of that element to it. It's a little bit darker, but grunge. kind of like a classier way, if that makes sense. Like, they're not bright, they're dimmed down, but they're still very wearable shades. So this is the palette. Like I said, I haven't seen anything duplicated in her other collections here. Let's go into Nouveau, because the palette from Anastasia is probably going to be one I'm going to get some questions about. Now, I thought this one would be a lot similar than it is. It actually isn't at all. When I see the Anastasia palette, I don't see much going on. Really, the shades in here are more sage than the sage shade in Natasha Denona's palette, right? Like, this looks like a true sage to me, or like an olive sage. Same with this one. Has a little bit more sagey quality versus there's blues in Natasha Denona's. So Wings might be a shade that you guys might be like, oh, is that similar to Marlin? Well, let's see. I honestly don't think so, but you never know. Let's put the two together. So we have the Nouveau shade on the left. We have Marlin on the right. So Wings does have more of a silvery green quality, and Marlin, as you can see, much more blue. So this is not a duplicate either. I initially thought that maybe if you had Nouveau, you might not need this palette from Natasha, but they actually are quite different. So this is definitely one that stands out in my opinion. So far, quality is consistent. Like I said, I haven't tested all of the shades yet, but my first impressions review is very strong. I really do like this palette as well. I think it's very different from her. Of course, this holds more of a special place in my heart because this is actually my friend Mel's idea actualized. Like, not quite, you know, shade for shade, but very similar. And because of that, I'm gonna hold this really close, only because I'm super biased. Like, one of my best friends created something super similar. So aside, I have to share that that is just bias. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and that this review was helpful. Do let me know all of your thoughts about it. I'm super curious. Unfortunately, this palette is not going to be available during the VIB sale, which sucks, but it is what it is. Thank you so much to Casey once again for sourcing this palette for me. And until my next one, guys, take care and stay safe. Bye, guys.